Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. We can turn that off, can't we? Hello, this is VK3AML. Wasn't aware that any audio was on that track. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, opening transmission for this 15th of October 2022. A number of eclectic clips for you this week. Not the least of which is coverage that I didn't feel previously at liberty to show. I'll go on to live camera there. Hello, folks. If you want to look in on the video that accompanies the audio that you're no doubt hearing on 147.475, 2 metres in the Melbourne area, please Google the phrase VK3AML 15 October 2022. That is, Google the phrase VK3AML 15 October 2022 and you'll get the videos that go with the audio that you're no doubt hearing at the moment. Haven't had a huge amount of time to prepare material this week. My wife, who has spinal problems, had a major operation, spinal operation. We wanted to get out and about and get her doing some retail therapy, so took a hotel room at Chadstone, only about 5 k's away, but in the middle of a major shopping precinct, Tuesday and Wednesday nights, and were away from home, while Prue and I enjoyed cafes and a little bit of retail therapy. So if tonight has the imprimatur of something that's thrown together in an extemporary way, you're absolutely correct. Well, first, there's a commercial development that I can mention by name on the video, the YouTube live stream, but I can't mention the name on ham radio, so I'm going to have to be quizzical and talk around this. But something has happened in our area that will result in me being significantly less well off in the pocket. And that is a major component store, which many of you will know, has opened a new outlet in Box Hill South. Now, previously I had to go to their outlets either at what we call Spaghetti Junction or at Ringwood, as you see there, is about 10 kilometres, and 10 kilometres south Spaghetti Junction, Springvale. But this new outlet has opened up 3 kilometres away, and heaven help my bank account. I've already been buying audio leads from them. This is a picture of where they are in Middleborough Road, Box Hill South. If you want to get there by public transport, it's possible. Bus 733, get off at Inala Village, as you see on your screen. And there is a map of the bus route concerned. It starts at Oakley Station at one end, Box Hill Station at the other, route 733, and that will take you there. I usually take the tram down Burwood Highway to Middleborough Road, and then this bus route, the last little bit, to the retail store in question, which has opened this very convenient new location. I won't mention the name of the store on the air, this being Ham Radio. Here's a quick picture of the store, the new and glossy outside. I think this was previously an auto barn or something similar, now has converted to this much more ham-friendly organisation. And here's a quick shot of the interior. This is nirvana for your average radio nerd. You're looking at heaven on a stick for most ham radio operators. And I have no financial connection with the firm whatever. I just think that this new branch should get some publicity, because it's in the middle of an area that has a fairly heavily ham radio populace, and is likely to be of interest. Now, I'll just go back to that clip for a moment, if I may. One thing that's been announced for that firm are books by a ham radio friend, Peter VK3 Yankee Echo, who is the QRP king of Australian ham radio. His book has a foreword by Dick Smith, VK2DIK, and although the book at present is listed in their catalogue, apparently it has yet to appear on the shelves, so stay tuned. Peter VK3ASE's publications will apparently soon be there, and you can read that up on that on the screen of our live stream. And their catalogue is now available, so I saw a huge pile of them in the shop the other day. So, without mentioning the firm, new outlet in Box Hill South for radio parts. Thank goodness for that. No more bus trip to Blackburn Station and rail to Ringwood, or bus trip down Springvale Road through Glen Waverley to Princes Highway. For me, it'll be the local. Had a visit a couple of weeks ago from Tom, VK3FTOM, one of the youngest local hams, and he was intrigued to see that we were capable of getting into repeaters quite a considerable distance from us here. Tom is limited to handheld mobile operation at his locality in Wheelers Hill. I'm operating here with, on my high power rig, 80 watts of FM into a Diamond X7000 mounted at the top of an 11 metre mast. So the furthest repeaters I can get without any adiabatic conditions are Mt Tassie in Gippsland, which is close to 200 kilometres away, and Mount Wombat to the north near Euroa, up in a range of hills just south of the Hume Highway. And why I'm getting Mount Wombat, I cannot say. It's over 3 mountain ranges, one at King Lake, the next one just north of Yark, and a third one near Mount Samaria, a bit east of the town of Swanpool. So there's no telling what 2 metres will get into if appropriate diffraction is occurring, knife-edge diffraction over mountain ranges. Anyway, here's what Tom recorded of me when he visited and had a look at me talking to I think it was VK3KAL, Neil at Alexandra. Yeah, I'm just showing Tom that we can actually get through all the time into Mount Wombat. I'm not sure why. There are a couple of mountains in the way. He's taking a video of me at the moment, by the way, so you'll probably see this and the voice of your good self on YouTube eventually. VK3KAL, VK3AML.
Roger on that. Tom's good at Australia actually.
As if there's some sort of multipath effect going on, but this repeater is kind of right on the edge of what I can get out to. Theoretically I shouldn't be hitting it because we're going over two mountain ranges. I suspect there's some very complicated knife edge diffraction going on. Nice to hear you anyway, hope you're keeping well. VK3KAL, VK3AML listening.
Probably about the same complication I've got at getting into the Melbourne repeater from here as well.
Anyway, that gives you some idea. Mt Tassie, Mount Wombat, the furthest repeaters that we can get from here. Yeah, I'm just showing Tom that we can actually get through all the time into Mount Wombat. I'm not sure why. There are a couple of... Oh dear. Well, that was the first blunder of the night. My apologies when you're trying to mix audio and mix videos. It happens. It happens indeed. Now, something that I've been meaning to show for a very long time, but I've been unable to, owing to the need for privacy. 10 years ago, I visited Dave VK3ASE at his home near Ormond Station. He's now moved north to Bendigo and opened a shortwave broadcasting station, SHORTWAVE Australia. And he operates on 4380 and 2315 kilohertz, 120 metres and it would be about 60 metres respectively. And he's getting out like a ton of bricks, particularly the last couple of weeks. Something has improved his signal no end. Dave, if you're watching this, I suspect that there are major antenna changes that have produced the difference, particularly on 2310. But I visited Dave when he used to do these shortwave transmissions on a Saturday night, as I do them now. And Dave's transmissions, the missions as he called them, went on from Ormond, Oakley Road, Ormond, for years and years. Actually from about 1978 through to, it must have been 2017 or thereabouts. So now that he's moved and all of this equipment is gone from the location you're about to see, I can show you this without fear of invading Dave's privacy. This was shot in 2012, and I'll try and explain what you're seeing. This is a visit that I did with Steve, VK3SL, or at least later he was 3SL, on Saturday evening, 4th of February. Mr. Stew, and there is his 160 metre antenna coming into view.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, it's not as high as I thought it would be.
Right. Decent sized tree at the back.
Okay, that's a good exterior. Okay, this is the control desk at VK3ASE. Not terribly good lighting, unfortunately. There's the computer screens on the right, and we're looking at keyboard. And I'd remind people this was shot in 2012, 10 years ago. Mic Mixer 1 with the controls.
Thank you.
Mic Mixer 2, which is currently on 160 and 80 metres. Up there are receivers up on the shelf. And at the moment Dave is setting up a projector. There's Stephen around the corner. This is a quick walkthrough of the back of Dave 3ASEs.
You might want to shot of me just in the back. Hang on.
Where is he? Down there. Oh, sorry.
I'll just put my pants up. Okay.
If you don't like the party, pull up your pants and go home. And there's the 160 metre transmitter. And that's your 80 metre transmitter you're adjusting there, isn't it?
No, that's just a monitor.
Audio, okay.
I think maybe the FRG7 might have been better than
Tape collection at the back there.
say 600. Here we are.
Oh, here's the 80 metres transmitter. If I go around the back here,
Like a domestic radio.
one can see the 813 glowing merrily away.
It also has in it just like a 2 metre converter. Some 2 metres as well. 2 metres AM presumably also there.
And there's Stephen, VK3ASE, having a look. Now VK3SL. Wonder if I can. Now I'm closer.
They're moving a tweak the converter to the aircraft band. And this is a great aircraft flying over. And
This used to be the Ripley beacon.
now that's interesting. The FM, the 230 converter, it probably comes down to the aircraft band, or it could easily be made to do that. Yeah, that's quite a good use for it.
Well, they,
Anything.
yeah, well, it wouldn't be too hard to knock out little external slips thing on it, but look, for that sort of money, you're not going to go to risk. But the more interesting thing that I received, which I didn't bid for on eBay,
There's the final with the 3300.
Was the DVD of Radio and Topics. Well, I'll have to do it.
There's where the 160 metres is coming from. For all of that high section filter up there.
Still having a lot of old dusty copies of giving
Whoop.
skim and pasting and trying to read them. Yeah, the DVD is very good. Although there's something about the old brown.
Here, walking into the 160 metre area,
On eBay, somebody was flocking radio.
there's the modulator with two 3300s, one partly obscured, glowing away.
To you anyway, go on.
The old Ripley non-directional beacon was on 400 kilohertz.
Doing the 3WI broadcast for PWI. I was surprised.
There's the 80 metre monitor loop up there.
That old magazine's quite expensive, although I did it at a handquest by about.
Everything's running very well. The new needle seems to be cutting okay, so
Oh,
I don't think we'll have any trouble there.
there's the 3300 inside the emitters with the RF output.
Oh, that meter, like the this is the RF meter from the roof that you saw the little coil.
Oh yeah.
So that's actually measuring the RF.
Oh, so the DC is coming all that way back down at Twin Lead or something.
Down there, I've got a multi-cable,
Right.
so you can tell if there's something wrong.
Okay. No worries. And Mr. Branch's voice coming forever out of 160 metres. The 160 metre coffee break people at Caulfield Racecourse, April 2012. And there are the Middleton Brothers, Colin and Laurie. 3HK on the right. There's Laurie. And they're looking at ATUs. ATUs with scorch marks in them. That's interesting. Now that there, I will freeze on. It's one of the few photos I ever got of the late John Adcock, VK3 Alpha Charlie Alpha. Those of you who knew him as an older man might have the wrong impression of him. He was, towards the end, rather confused I think, getting into the latter parts of dementia. And I would hate people to remember him that way. When I was first interested in radio in the 60s, John's voice was the first I heard on 160 metres. In fact, he was one of the first to come onto 160 metres when the band was opened up for general usage in about 1962. Based in Oak Park near Essendon Airport. He was prominent in the later opening up of the 630 and 1200 metre band, I think. Worked CW in both, top-loaded vertical over most of his property. But particularly, I remember in the early 70s, about 1971, he devised a method of producing sideband using an analogue computer, synthesizing the frequency components necessary mathematically by generating the necessary Fourier series. Brilliant work. He actually took out a provisional patent on the system, never followed it through to a full patent, but it was at the time an incredibly advanced and brilliant idea. I miss the guy, I miss his intellectual input, even though we were politically at opposite ends of the spectrum that rarely mattered, except when he got heated about it. But these are among the few videos I ever took which had him in. 2012, 10 years ago. Back to the video. The Middleton Brothers with a portable HF antenna, loading coil in the middle, do you see there? This is one of the Middleton's antenna tuning units. VK3AW and VK3LO.
Must be been caught fire a few times. I'll let us know quickly.
And loading resistors with a bit of burn marks on them. Another one of their ATUs, beautifully designed and constructed, I must say. Mostly out of old parts, particularly that capacitor at the top. And this is a higher power version for feeding balanced antenna feed line, as you could probably tell from that centre coil. An article on Middleton Brothers' work from the local Northwest Suburbs newspaper 2001, which anybody can freeze frame on and read if they so desire. These are just selected photographs that I took of the various ATUs that they'd built. Marvellous standard of construction. One doesn't see that so much these days. A balun, part of an antenna loading coil for a portable antenna. And this is the display table. These were taken at Caulfield Racecourse, actually. A little AM transmitter, one valve. VK3AW, I think it's Colin Middleton. There's Luke Steele. .3JO at the background there. Nigel Holmes talking to 3BIG. Another bit of John Adcock. Anthony, VK3JIA, is the youngest bloke there. 3HK on the left. There's Drew Diamond on the right. And they're looking at a solid state 160 metre transmitter that was picked up, only partly complete, was picked up at a second-hand store by Anthony 3JIA.
Where's the mic going?
Well, this is what we don't know. This is what we don't know. But I did have a look, and if you have a look on the back, it's got VXO and all this this sort of thing.
Somebody
I think
had
he was
some
still
booze.
doing it when he died. He was going to finish and then stand up.
And just while I think of it, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, the regular Saturday night test transmission, currently showing a 10-year-old video that I shot of a gathering of 160 metre AM enthusiasts at Caulfield Racecourse in 2012. Currently we're looking at a transmitter that was picked up second-hand by Anthony VK3ASE.
He was going to mount an extra circuit board or something, so he hadn't finished. Just wait till he finishes taking the photo. The other reason it's not a house. Oh, video. Everybody was picking this up, Steve. And they said, oh, it's a power supply,
Steve.
Power supply, we don't want it. I said, it's not a power supply at all, because it's got RF. And the other reason it's not a power supply is because
I think this unit was actually incomplete. It must have been part of a deceased estate or something similar.
Standoffs here, and he hadn't finished. He's got feeding, so
They've got 2 miles, haven't they?
he hadn't quite finished it. So I'm going to finish the project. Well, it must be. It's 2 diamonds, Class C transfer.
They're trying to work out what is missing from this transmitter. It wasn't at all clear. Some more ATU photos, more of Colin and Laurie's work, including some of that chain drive there. Highly inventive, 3JO on the left, that's Laurie Middleton on the right, I think. Not sure who that is at the back. More general views of the display tables. 3RD Rays transmitter. Single tube AM. And this is the more modern design, the Class D AM transmitter by Drew Diamond. 3XU. Paddle key. 3HK is intrigued. There's John, 3GG. XKU. I was shooting this with a Kodak camera, a ZI-8, little device rather like a mobile phone. Fixed focus, unfortunately, so some of this is slightly soft in focus. Looking at the tuning arrangements on portable HF antennas. And some more still photos taken in the course of the day. When amateurs get together, it's like a major nerd fest. Propeller head department. Mostly equipment built by 3AW and 3LO. There's a Class D transmitter by Drew Diamond, I think. VK3XU. Paddy board construction for a lot of it. But still a very nice example of 1.8 megahertz AM transmitting, and Class D, highly efficient. This is, I'll think of his name, Roscoe Hammond, who now lives down at Mardan, I think, in Gippsland, or might have moved into Leongatha by now, and Dave VK3ASE on the right, holding a beer. Nigel Holmes in the background, with on the left 3BIG. On the left there, I am trying to think, VK3AX, I think. John 3GG being pointed out the salient points on several photographs. And I just went mad with the camera that day. In a way, I'm glad that I did, because I don't think there's otherwise record of this day's efforts. Now, after that, later in the afternoon, this is back in 2012, a great group of us from 160 metres visited Dave VK3ASE. There's Dave's 160 metre antenna in the front there, his VHF further back. He had quite a few antennas up then. I think the 160 metre antenna remains, but the VHF antennas have all gone up to Bendigo. That's Dave's backyard. His ham shack was that brick garage on the left there. And we followed Dave inside, where I started the camera. That's Mark Skurnick standing in the doorway. And as we come in, Dave's announcing booth is that timber construction on the left. That's the leads rack, audio leads rack. Nigel Holmes and Dallas, 3B I think. And 3BIG on the left, looking at Dave's 80 metre transmitter.
If you just adjust the drive and the bias, you can sort of get
Transmitting some
more bang
rather whimsical
it depends on the tuning.
electronic organ music.
Yep. It doesn't matter. It's only
Well, even with plate and screen, there's some tuning.
yeah.
Plate and screen modulation on the 80 metre transmitter. Nigel Holmes, Dallas, 3B. Dave, 3ASE, as he was 10 years ago. Oh, music. I hope I don't get done copyright on YouTube. This is VK3AML with a regular Saturday night test transmission. If you want to look in on this, the video that accompanies it, please Google VK3AML 15 October 2022. That's Google the phrase VK3AML 15 October 2022 and you'll see the video that goes with this audio. Dave's showing us where the instructions for building this came from. A very old copy of the ARRL handbook, about 1950.
Absorbed in there.
Chris, have you been to the Shepparton transmitting station in recent years?
No, I haven't actually. I haven't been there.
Probably overdue for a visit.
Take your work up there.
Take your receiver with you and you can plug it across the...
Okay.
Nigel Holmes, who was at that time one of the people in charge of Radio Australia, the late lamented Radio Australia, here pulling out his car.
How about the car? I feel like I can get my hand into this. I take there's the card. I'm not in focus. Oh, right. Okay. Oh, you're that Nige. Okay.
Maybe you should get in through one bridge. That's just the remote mode. Okay.
Dave holding court and going into the announcing booth.
And here are the antennas. Up there.
That's the 160 metre antenna on the left, top-loaded vertical, and a big a gum tree which partly fell down later on.
That's the backyard. So there's music going on 80.
VK3BIG at the desk on the right, tuning a crystal set. Inspecting the rack with carrier jacks.
Yeah. So,
Workbenches, etc. around the back, and there's a view in the back of the 80 metre transmitter.
Final.
So which number is that, Chris?
Kodak ZA8.
I wonder if Kodak going against the wall.
Probably not available anymore.
Yeah, Mr. Egg was wondering if Kodak would go to the wall, and sure enough, it did.
Yes, a lot of stock.
So this
They're going fairly cheap.
little camera that I shot this on, the Kodak ZA8, was one of the last products Kodak ever produced. That's Don Bainbridge, 3BIG on the left.
Mr. Bainbridge. And, gosh, how many Jews can you fit them in?
that'll be daunting.
What an unfortunate comment.
Yeah.
This is Mr. Bainbridge's crystal set.
Makes it a lot of monitor.
Listening through high impedance headphones, or headphones with a transformer, I think it is. A contemplative Bainbridge. And this is VK3AML with a regular Saturday night test transmission and YouTube live stream. which you can watch by Googling the phrase VK3AML 15 October 2022. We're currently touring Dave 3ASE's old shack, now demised and moved to Bendigo. And this video was taken 10 years ago, 2012. A glowing 813, a bright emitter, thoriated tungsten veil. You don't see them too much. And this is inside the announcing booth. Dave has an announcing booth with a proper double glazed window out to the transmitters, which are fan cooled.
Okay.
Anyway, let's see.
Listening off air. That's the listening rack on the left.
Fine. What was that? Oh, you're going for a complete overload.
No, this is sidebands.
Oh, okay.
That's down to that's 1843.
Okay.
So I can put the filter on here.
Tuning into the sidebands to see how far they spread.
And you would rectify those from the computers or something?
That is from the... I don't have to put it
Oh, cheesy music, I must say. It is actually legal to transmit music on ham radio in Australia. It's just not legal to transmit entertainment. How you define that is another thing. A look at the transmitter's output waveform. Nice AM. There's Dave and Don Bainbridge in the studio. Is it any wonder he graduated to shortwave broadcasting? And there's Dallas 3B looking at the 80 metre transmitter. Dave caught with mouth agape, pointing to the internals of the 160 metre transmitter once it was switched off and opened. And in case you're wondering about how much power this is running, the 160 metre transmitter could only do the legal limit. It was run well under its capabilities. I'll just turn that down a bit. It's run well under its capabilities, and most of the space in this was originally devoted to the guts of an NDB, a non-directional beacon on long wave, for which Dave had converted, and a lot of the guts was to do with remote operation using relays and uniselectors. All of that's gone, so this transmitter is actually a lot lower power than you'd think. Capable of about 200 watts, but being run at 120.
This is Dave's backyard. We're going in for coffee.
A final coffee at Dave's old QTH in Melbourne. And a quick glimpse of...
Wires everywhere. There's the 160 metre antenna at the back.
And in we come. Memories of the old days at 3ASE. Don Bainbridge and the rest. And great thanks to Dave and finally being able to make use of that material at a distance of 10 years. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with a Saturday night test transmission. You've been watching a video of Dave 3ASE's old QTH in Ormond, and I've felt very reticent to show that until such time as he'd moved elsewhere. Otherwise I'm kind of breaching privacy, but now that he's gone and his transmissions are no longer on 160 and 80 metres, I think it's worthwhile seeing the source of all of those transmissions that we listened to for all of those decades. And thank you, Dave, for doing it. Thank you also for running your Shortwave Australia on 4835 kHz and 2310, which we receive with increasing strength as you progress with that. Now we'll have a break for me announcing as I take you to some British footage, hopefully, of the Rugby radio station, which was for 40 years, nearly 50 years, I think a little bit more than that, the main station of the British Post Office for time signals on long wave. Massive antennas on the thing, as you will see. But this coverage was taken for a local television station in the 1960s, and I'm hoping to God it doesn't breach copyright. But anyway, let's have a look at Rugby Radio Station UK. The famous Rugby opened in 1926, finally closed and demolished in 2007.
Rugby Radio Station. I expect you've often passed this familiar scene by train or car, and perhaps like me, you've wondered what happens behind the high wire fence. These towering masts within the 1,600 acres of the station, some of them over 800 feet high, have commanded the Warwickshire countryside since the early 1920s. What are they for? How are they maintained? What are the men like who climb them in all weathers? What is the station's function? Let's find out.
Oh, sweet. Good to see you. Yes. Now then, you're going to tell us something about Rugby Radio Station. Can we start off at the very beginning, how it all began, a bit about the history and the development of the station?
Well, Rugby Radio actually first came on the air in 1925 when GBR, high-power, low-frequency transmitter, was erected. It was originally erected and put into service. The original idea was that it should form part of the Imperial Wireless chain. But before it was actually finished, Marconi demonstrated that the use of high frequencies could give much better and more economical and efficient circuits. So the original intention was abandoned, and the transmitter then became world famous in its use for broadcasting to ships, messages, press and time signals.
Yes.
Thereafter, of course, the station was then equipped with these new high-frequency transmitters for use on telex circuits and the like.
I think this is a point we should make. Rugby Radio Station, of course, is not radio as we all in the street understand it. That is something to transmit radio programs that we can receive on our domestic receivers, but it's in fact for transmitting, as you say, telephone conversations and so on.
It's telephony and public use of telegraph, telex services and the like.
Yes.
We are, of course, the transmitting side of the setup, in that the receiving stations are elsewhere.
What is the present function of the station?
Most of our traffic consists of telex circuits, private wires, public user circuits, telephone channels and even picture channels. In addition to that, of course, we have a very considerable responsibility because we radiate standard frequencies and time signals which we generate ourselves from a high efficiency standard.
This is a sort of mean time that people all over the world use to work to.
It's the only way on the low frequencies where we can compare time and frequency on an international standard with the high degree of accuracy which is now called for.
Particularly with space research.
Yes, well, we're not actually directly connected with that, but the new post office receiving station at Goonhilly Downs relies on us to some extent for accuracy of time and frequency.
"12 masts, 820 feet high, carry the long-wave aerials, mainly used for shipping, press, and frequency and time standards. But the main telecommunications traffic is carried on 28 shortwave transmitters with a vast array of directional aerials, covering almost every point of the compass. Rugby Radio serves a vast number of customers throughout the world, but of course a great part of its business is the transmission of overseas phone calls. To find out what's involved, let's go to the main control console, which can be operated by one man and is in constant touch with the International Telephone Exchange at Brent in northwest London.
Rugby Radio.
Rugby, Brent here. Could you QSY GIM34 to GIM30, please?
GIM34 to GIM30 for Perth. What route would you like?
Long route, please.
Long route, righto.
This is the nerve centre of the whole station. And to tell us about it, here's Mr. Donahue.
All the transmitters are controlled by means of switches on the console, which you can see. And from here, the frequency can be changed on requests from either the radio terminal at Brent, who control the telephony transmissions, or from Electra House on the embankment in London, from which all the telegraph transmissions are routed. The telephony transmissions are scrambled at the London end in order to ensure privacy and eavesdropping by the public. And we'll now switch you over and you can hear a transmission being radiated.
Frequency inversion.
Inside maintenance, involved though it is simple compared with the problems of looking after the outside equipment. You can imagine the effects of this last winter and the amount of ice that collects on an aerial a quarter of a mile long. And then, of course, the masts have to be painted. I talked to Mr. Chapman, the man in charge of this operation.
There are 12 820-foot masts, and these are painted every 5 years. It takes approximately 1 month for 6 men to paint an 820-foot mast. That includes wire brushing and painting. During the winter, we have emergencies when icing of the aerials occurs. Tension indicators tell us when the aerials must be slackened.
Now let's hear from one of these spidermen or riggers who maintain these masts in all weathers. Here's Mr. Lawrence.
I've been at rugby now back about 23 years, and of course going up these masts, I mean, I just take it as a matter of course. I mean, we just don't worry. And the only thing you notice is that on the top, if it's rough, well, of course that's only when you're painting. When you're leaning down on the outside, you're painting downhill, that the centre of the mast goes in, and that means that you're going out. And then all of a sudden you see the centre of the mast coming back again. Of course, that's you going the other way. You think the wind's decent today, but I mean, it's terrible. I mean, sometimes, I mean, it's a real idle wind. I mean, it doesn't have time to go around, you go straight through you. Last winter, I mean, it was a terror. I mean, I've had a few winters. I mean, the 47 was bad. This one was atrocious. I mean, you don't realise, I mean, it's nearly half a day's work to get to work, in fact, never mind about doing anything. What we did, as my men with me, we were on shift. We did a 12-hour stint. Unfortunately, I came on nights. And to go about these fields and drifts and snow and the wind terrific. And it was bitter cold. I mean, gloves they just didn't hold anything out. It didn't matter what you had on, it went straight through you. I mean, your legs froze up, your shoes, your laces were froze up, and I never known anything, and I'll tell you the truth, I never want to see another winter again like it. We had a terrific amount of ice on the masts. Well, we had to climb up them because we pay out and lower our aerials on the hoists. We changed over. Well, it took 2 men or sometimes 3 just to take the brake off, whereas it's normally one man's job. And well, you just had to break it off. It was there in lumps. And then when the thaw came, it's every man for himself. I mean, we had protective hats, but you'd see nothing like a piece as big as a churn come purling down and crash straight through the hedge or wallop just behind you.
The 12 820-foot masts carry the long-wave aerials which lead to the appropriate transmitters. These are housed in one of the original buildings. This building also holds the frequency standard equipment.
The 16 kc transmitter GBR is well known and has been in existence since 1926. It transmits time signals each day. At present there are 4 of them at each 6-hour interval, the time signals lasting for 5 minutes. The transmissions are used by astronomical societies, technical colleges, and many organisations interested in accurately checking time and frequency. The frequency of the service is controlled by the National Physical Laboratory at Teddington and the time by the Royal Observatory at Herstmonceux. The seconds pulses that you can now hear are obtained from the coal cathode clocks, and they are so accurate that it would take 140 years for them to drift 1 second.
We've seen what rugby has done and what it's doing. What of the future? The upholding of the marvellous record of reliability, accuracy, and never a breakdown since the station opened. And when we get a British communications satellite into space, rugby will probably be one of the most important monitoring stations. This then has been just a brief look at the story of Rugby Radio Station.
And this is not Rugby Radio Station, this is VK3 Alpha Michael Lima on 147.475 and YouTube live streaming. If you Google the phrase VK3AML 15 October 2022, you'll get the video that goes with this audio. Time at 10:18 p.m. Apologies to those who were listening to the earlier video clips. We had an extra monitor going that was producing an echo, which I've now switched off. I have no way of monitoring that on the. I have a way of monitoring, of course, the transmissions on 2 meters, which I'm listening to through these headphones, but on the stream it's very difficult for me to monitor. There's no audio feedback, so the only audio feedback I get is from the text chat on the return text. And thank you to Tom George in Ballarat for telling us that that was the case. Thank goodness there was not too much chat necessary that was affected by that echo. This is VK3AML. I'll now show you a bit of video that I shot with Mike VK7MJ, Mike Roth, who I hope is watching. Hello, Mike. While I was in New Zealand in 2019, I shot this video around the University of Otago. Not rugby. God. So many mistakes I'm making tonight, very unprofessional. This is the University of Otago, Dunedin. Very pleasant campus, as you can see, and this is where Mike 7MJ did his PhD thesis on radio astronomy back in the 1970s. In fact, with an office in this building where the university's radio club had their antenna, I think hanging from that very tower. University of Otago, incorporated in 1869, very early university, and Mike's office was up in one of those upper rooms, I believe, where he also had his radio shack. While we were there, we saw some sort of promotional video being shot of the Chancellor of the university and some assistants, which you see there. The University of Otago is basically the biggest business in Dunedin. It's one of the main reasons that Dunedin exists. There's the top of the tower, the original 1869 tower. And you'll notice the lightning arrestor down there. Dunedin's local television is derived from Mount Cargill, a little bit north of the city, and Mike and I went up there to have a look at his old hometown. That's the main television transmitter, mobile phone, etc., mast for the Dunedin area, receiving satellite dish pointing north, presumably where they catch all of the video from further north in New Zealand, Auckland, Wellington. And now if we look south off the top of Mount Cargill, we get a magnificent view of Otago Harbour, Otago Peninsula on the other side of the Otago Harbour, Portobello on the far side where Mike lived while he was living in the Dunedin area. And there is Dunedin south of us there, nestled in a valley, an extremely beautiful university town in incredibly beautiful surroundings, and we had it on a perfect summer day. This was in January of 2019, looking south down the coast towards Invercargill there. There's the centre of the city. The university is most of the left-hand side of this shot. And over there, on the other side of Otago Harbour, is Portobello, where Mike used to live. You'll see a little of that later on. Up the top there, Lanark Castle, where they had a amateur repeater years ago. Here's Mike having a look at the satellite facilities on top of Mount Cargill. He's fairly shy of being filmed, so I didn't get very much of Mike on camera. Another shot of Dunedin. And a slow zoom in. That's a sports facility on the left there, you see, near the head of Otago Harbour. Port Chalmers, further down Otago Harbour, is the main port for the town. It's fairly shallow up this end of the Otago Harbour. There's the centre of the city, the Octagon on the left. Now, this is an interesting locale tied up with Mike's history. It's called Swampy Summit. It's somewhat to the west of Mount Cargill, and it was on the slopes of this that Mike built a radio telescope designed for very low, comparatively, frequencies, 21 megahertz or thereabouts, listening to the magnetic whistlers generated by the planet Jupiter, which was the subject of his PhD thesis back in the 1970s. Not much to interfere with radio there, except for these local inhabitants. Now this is Broad Bay. We're now heading up the Otago Peninsula towards Portobello, and I think we're coming into the town of Portobello now. Otago Harbour on our left, and Mike was visiting his old residence, just a little bit inland from the beach there. That's his residence there. Mike having a look. After 40 years. And then we went into the town of Portobello to see how it had changed. Very pretty little spot. Though it was quite a commute for Mike to go into the university every day on his motorcycle from here. I think it's about 17 or 18 kilometres. And on an icy winter day this far south, this is actually a long way south of Hobart in latitude, you can imagine there was a little bit of black ice on the road from time to time. The things we do when we're young. Local museum at Portobello and the local bone orchard, and this is out at the heads of the Otago Harbour. There's a lighthouse there. Looking into the Otago Harbour, there's one of the vessels coming up, the main shipping channel. And then Mike drove us back to Dunedin. That's our hire car. And this is the centre of Dunedin. It's called the Octagon, an octagonal series of streets, concentric one within the other. I think that's the town hall on the right. And this was actually shot on a Saturday when they had market stalls in the Octagon. And that's them down there. I think I bought some jewellery for my wife, Prue, and a knitted hat, which I later wore to keep myself warm on Stewart Island, south of Invercargill. Regent Theatre there. And there's the stall where I bought the craft. This is Dunedin's railway station. Absolutely magnificent building dating from the time when Dunedin was made of money as a result of the gold rush way, way back. Now there are only tourist railways operating from here. Wonderful building. For those who've never visited Dunedin, I do suggest you take a trip there. There's a lot to see. Extremely pretty. People are very friendly and very empathic, which is something that stands out to an Australian who frequently gets treated offhandedly in country towns. You won't find that treatment here. Australians are welcomed as we found out when we visited the radio club. And at this point we were going through a part of Dunedin called the Exchange, on our way to the local NZART branch in MacAndrew Road, I think it was. And I shot only a very little video there, which you will see shortly. This is the entrance to the local radio club, the local branch of the NZART. Their club rooms, which have been there for I think 50 years or more. The front property I think is rented out. The back property, which has a big meeting room, is owned by the local radio club. And we'll take you in there in just a moment. Inside the Dunedin Radio Club, that's Mike 7MJ on the left. The person with the green baseball cap on is Ron, ZL4RMF, who we later visited. Prominent HF operator, has an all-digital shack. Peter ZL4LV in the checked shirt with his back to us. Peter would now be, I think, 93 or thereabouts. Anyway, that's the Dunedin Radio Club rooms, very much like the rooms that we have in our various local radio clubs here. And this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, with the regular Saturday night test transmission and YouTube live stream, which you can see if you're listening on 2 metres. Just checking my output. Yeah, it's okay. If you're listening on 2 metres, you can Google the phrase VK3AML 15 October 2022 and you'll find our live stream with the video that goes with this audio. I had a very welcome visit from Mike VK7MJ, who's been a colleague in modulated light communication experiments for the last, 35 years I've known Mike, ever since he published an article on the subject in AR, Amateur Radio magazine. And we struck up a correspondence directly after that, and I think that was 1988, and in 1992 I first visited him when he'd moved to Brisbane from Adelaide. Mike was originally a VK5 operator born in Adelaide, has since lived in Brisbane, Papua New Guinea, Taupo in North Island of New Zealand. He also lived, as we saw, Portobello, Dunedin, and various other places around New Zealand. Now lives in Margate, an extreme southern suburb, or perhaps you would say a satellite town of Hobart, and still gets around Australia. He did a bit of a tour and lobbed in here for a few days, and just before he left, as a sort of an afterthought, I interviewed him here in this shack, talking about his background in ham radio, which he tended to be a bit jokey about, but and it was a very disjointed sort of a conversation because my wife was yelling out from the other room, "Are you ready yet?" She was driving us in to drop Mike off at the railway to go to Tullamarine Airport to get his plane home. So this was just an interview recorded off the cuff with Mike, and pardon us if it is a little bit disjointed, but I was very glad to get this recording of Mike. Very difficult man to pin down to an interview. Sorry, Mike. Mike Roth, VK7MJ. And I've made another mistake. We've gone back to the wrong video clip, so let me correct that. Here we go. Mike Roth interviewed at 3AML, 1st of October 2022.
That's the camera there. Okay, Mike, how did you get into ham radio? What's the story?
Let's start again. I was being a bit silly.
So what's the story? How did you get into ham radio?
Well, I'd always been interested in radio. Built the usual crystal sets and that, and I'd seen in the cadets that people of the army had these little portable pack sets. In those days there were valves and B batteries, but I thought, oh, it'd really be nice to get into it, and eventually another chap, friend at school, he was into it, and eventually they sort of started building radios, and I acquired, I think, from the old from second hand from someone else, an old number 19 set.
Oh yeah.
The old tank sets. You wouldn't be allowed to have them on the air these days. They I think covered the whole of the 80 metre band in about 15 degrees of the of the tuning knob.
Yeah.
And they only had frequency markers every 100 kilohertz. They went from 3 to 8 megs.
Yeah.
So I eventually decided to get go for an amateur licence.
Okay. Did you have any Elmer or encouraging ham in the process of this, or did you meet any hams or go along to any clubs at that stage?
No. There were a couple of people. I think there was a fellow, I can't try to think, his name was Chris, and he was studying to be a lawyer. When I went to the university, I joined the University of Adelaide Radio Club.
Mm-hmm.
By that stage I had a limited licence anyway. That was VK3ASE. And it was on the lift building of the old engineering building and the lift motor room up top, because when they poured the building, somehow the lift shaft wasn't quite square. They made a mistake, and so we had a transmitter up on top, and we used the club's call sign, and we used to do a bit of work on 80 and 40. It was an 813 driven by an 807. The old Geloso VFOs had a 6V6 in the output.
Yeah.
And that drove, and that was about 5 watts of RF.
Right.
And I think, and it was an 813, I don't know if it was an 807, no, it was an 813, and a couple of 811s, and some mercury vapour rectifiers to drive them.
So I gather you got into ham radio with a full call from day one?
No, it was a limited call. I was VK7MJ.
Oh, okay.
And then, but mainly operated an HF out of the radio club, and
hopefully with a full call in attendance.
Sometimes.
Oh. Yeah.
There was a little bit, the Radio Telegraphy Act was very specific, but we were a little ignorant of some of the full.
There was the law, and then there was the application of the law.
Yeah, it was a bit erratic.
Yeah.
And the aerial, I think it was between two of the university buildings. We had a 40 metre length of wire, and it was a bit left over from somewhere else. It was about 7. It would have been about 200 amp wire. It was a very, very heavy wire strung between these buildings, and didn't sway much in the breeze.
Okay.
And we earthed it to the steel frame of the building, and to tune it up, we had a little L network.
Yeah.
And we leaned a fluorescent light next to it, and when it lit up to the full length, we would.
Yeah. Well, about what year would this have been?
1962 to 1969, but 68, 69 I was pretty busy. It was mainly 62, 65, 66.
All right. And you were involved with an attempt to launch a balloon somewhere.
Yes.
Are you prepared to talk about that on camera?
Well, considering it's some 60 years ago.
Yeah.
No, it was 50 odd years ago. Yes, we thought we'd try a mobile operation was starting to become common. 6 metre mobile was people using old taxi sets. We thought we'd actually try a bit of an experiment, and we'd put a little radio transmitter on a balloon. And one of the chaps built up this really simple little 6 metre transmitter. I think it was not quite a modulated oscillator, but it was pretty close to it. And it was transistorized. It was one of the, and it produced about 100 milliwatts or something on 53.1, I think it was the general band everyone used on AM. And the university used to make balloons out of plastic tubing and filled them up with hydrogen. And we discovered that we could buy this plastic tube and got about 10th length of plastic tube, and we filled it with coal gas. Now coal gas is about 50% hydrogen, and it was just before they stopped coal gas production in Adelaide and went to natural gas.
Right.
And we filled this balloon with something like about 30 or 40 cubic metres of coal gas. The fire risk would have been quite extreme. But
what did the balloon consist of, though?
It was a tube. They used to wrap mattresses in a tube in plastic, but it was quite a heavy wall plastic, and it was sold as a great roll with the tube, and the tube was about 6 feet, probably just under 2 metres wide. And what they did is just tied one end up and knotted, and then the other you tied in a thing and put a little bit of a hose in and then tied the knot off. But what we didn't realise is this 10 metres of plastic weighed about 4 kilos, and the total displacement of the balloon was only about 5 kilos. So it only just floated.
Right.
And we put the transmitter on, and we had 2 or 3 stations sitting up on 2 stations sitting up on different hills around Adelaide, and we had a map, and I'd put grid squares on, and they would and they had some 6-metre beams to try and track it, and we called the station George. George.
Okay.
And George was a mobile station they were going to track. It didn't have a call sign, and I don't know if we called him George, but we called George. And eventually, it took us about 3 hours to fill this balloon. The pressure of the gas in the gas main was relatively very low. We did some interesting bits of plumbing to get the gas out.
All right.
I won't say any more.
All right.
So we, to get the increased gas flow out, eventually it was ready, and and by the time we went to launch it, there was a bit of a breeze coming up. And so we went to launch it, and the thing would never get past about 45 degrees. And so I put a ladder up and I climbed on the roof, and I waited till the balloon was almost vertical and let it go. And it started to rise, and the bottom swung open, down, and the radio transmitter got stuck in the next neighbour's television aerial on their chimney. And the balloon spun around, and then the thing was fitted with a parachute we built, and a timer, which was a little tiny travel clock, which had been set for about 2 hours' time. When the alarm went off, it pulled the release lever of a tiny mouse trap and pulled the pin to the thing to drop, and we tested it out from the chemistry building at the university, hanging it out on a long pole, and went ding-a-ling-a-ling-a-ling, and down it would go, and the parachute all opened, and it landed on the lawn below, much to the surprise of the students down there. And so it triggered, and the balloon went flying up, and there was the aerial hanging, and the next door neighbours were an old couple who spent all their day watching television. Now the 6-metre band wasn't very far from Channel 2 in those days, so I'm sure on their television all they were seeing was go burp, 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 on the bars across the television.
Right.
So grabbed the ladder, raced up their television, the chimney was right next to the fence, only probably a metre inside, raced up, disengaged, got down, and a few minutes later the neighbours come out looking at the aerial. Where's all this? Thinking there must be. And there's all the people on the ground rolling in laughter as this balloon went end over end up through a hole in the cloud into the atmosphere.
Okay.
And further up.
And it took the transmitter with it?
No, the transmitter was still sitting on the ground because that had triggered the release mechanism. So the release mechanism, when they let the balloon the balloon was only just buoyant.
Yes.
But now it didn't know payload. There was probably an extra 500 or 600 grams.
So nobody knows what happened to George.
No, George was never seen again. But the funny part is these people are up saying, "Yeah, George has been delayed," and then they went back. They called in, and they'd get the call signs out and they'd burst out laughing.
Yeah.
What's happening? Where's George? We haven't heard him yet.
Yeah.
And eventually someone managed to stop, say, George left home without his radio. What? We'll tell you about it later.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. What we'd done was probably highly illegal.
Were there any other sort of outrageous things that the radio club got into at that stage? Or?
No. This was a bit of one of those madcap things. We all decided this would be a great thing to do. That was 1969, I think.
Okay.
Or 68. Well, 68, I think it was.
Now, by that time, you'd got into modulated light, hadn't you?
Yes.
Okay. What's the story there?
Well, I'd seen a couple of articles, and it was the old, I think Radcom, the RSGB used to have a magazine, I think it was called Radio Communications, and there was a couple of someone had written an article about the experiments they'd done during the war, when there were no amateur radios, so they used to get a 15-watt light globe and about a 5-watt amplifier. The old 6V6 was quite a good thing, and you just run a 15-watt light globe and they put it in a bit of a reflector, and they were getting talking, only 100 metres or so, and a photo cell at the other end with in a mirror or a big lens. And they said yes, they got it. It was a bit woofy and there wasn't much treble, but it worked, so I thought that was interesting, and so I put a little article in, a request in the letters to the editor for the old radio, TV and hobbies.
Okay.
And it turned out that there was a chap by the name of Stuart Powell. I discovered his name was actually David Stuart Powell. He was Welsh, and he lived not far from where I was. And he wrote back, and several other people had called me on the phone, telephoned me and say they'd tried different things, and neon globes and torch globes and that. And so we did a few experiments with the old OC71 with the paint scraped off and the torch globe, and got sounds anyway. It turned out intelligible speech was a bit difficult because anything above about 200 hertz was severely attenuated at 3 dB per octave.
The filament couldn't heat up and cool down fast enough.
Cool down again. And I discovered that, yes, the time constants of the filaments were about 100 milliseconds, about anything after about 10 hertz, really, the attenuation, there was a 60. So by the time you got to a kilohertz, it was about 0.1% modulation. And but we, using a torch globe and Stuart found this epidiscope lens, which was about an 8-inch lens with about it had about a 13 centimetre focal length, and we built a couple of and he found an old projector lens about 4 inches, and we built two of these things. We got, I think, about a kilometre, a bit over a kilometre. It was only just audible. And then it was 68, because in 69 I did my honours year at the University of Adelaide, and they were looking at using optical communication for a micropulsation detector down in Antarctica and possibly up at the university's field station. Now, a micropulsation detector was essentially a giant ferrite rod wound with about 130. It was about ferrite rod about half a metre long, and made up of blocks of rod, and detecting very subaudible fluctuations in the magnetic field
of the Earth.
Of the Earth's magnetic field. And they had ones in Antarctica, and what they used to use down there was a little radio transmitter on about 100 megs, and that's connected to a VCO and sent it down as a tone. That was fairly standard, and you could record this tone on a tape recorder, and you had a tangent oscillator running on the second channel, so then you could digitise it by just how many counts of doing the count rate and using the standard, the compensated for the tape speed, because you'd use the second track as the frequency reference and you just measured the ratio of the two frequencies. That was a very common trick, and it was fairly slow, only data points of 1 or 2 hertz, so you'd count for half a second and how many counts appeared on the other channel. Just random audio. And so they thought, well, we can't do this. You can get away with all sorts of things in Antarctica. There's no really radio. The Wireless Telegraphy Act really didn't apply down there for all this sort of stuff. But when you're in, they wanted something, and they thought of optics, and they said
for the Adelaide Hills.
For the Adelaide Hills, there was a field station at Mount Torrens, which was spotted good clear air, and they used to have a laser up there to looking for air glow, and there was laser looking for high-level clouds, and it was a ruby laser, and so it worked out. That's when I did all worked out all the mathematics that was I eventually published back in 1987, some 27 years later.
Yes.
When I started getting back into it again, and a new contact.
So what was the pulsation recording for? What were you
basically looking at? It basically just fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, mainly due to the effect of things like the solar wind gives the field a squeeze, and when it gets squeezed, the magnetic field gets, and there's squeezed, the field increases, the lines are compressed. So it was essentially trying to measure the oscillations in the magnetic field in the sort of 0.1 to sort of 20 hertz type.
Okay, this is for a physics course, or?
No, this was just generally trying to understand the magnetosphere. It was the way of listening to the magnetosphere.
Okay.
Because if you played them back at the tape at ordinary speeds, these were easily recorded, sometimes recorded on tape running at 1 millimetre a second type stuff. And you played them back at the ordinary speed, and they sounded a bit like thunder peals and that. And so you were basically listening to the solar wind plucking the field lines.
Oh.
The best description I can think of it.
Okay. Did that lead you to your later work with the magnetic field of Jupiter? The radiation.
Yes and no. The University of Adelaide was quite heavily involved in upper atmosphere work, and they had a station at Buckland Park, north of Adelaide, out on the plains, and this was about a 2 kilometre array of dipoles tuned, I think, 2 megahertz, I think they were. And they all had individual feed lines going back to the station, and basically recording the cosmic noise. And as the ionosphere moved, all of these went into the box, and the output of all these, I think 96 receivers, so across dipoles, the 96 receivers had a light globe attached to them, and this was photographed with a slow moving film, and you could actually see the shadow of the ionosphere moving as it went across. It was a bit like being look at the bottom of a swimming pool, and you can see the fluctuations of the waves go across the surface. Well, it was basically looking at waves in the ionosphere. We didn't have any satellites. They did have satellites. Satellites did go up, because they went up and started up in about 57, 58. The satellite era started. But this was, I think it stayed in service, I think, until well into the 1980s, the old Buckland Park.
So your research was there, but you went into the mining industry, didn't you?
Oh gosh, that was quite a long later. In 1970 I was up in Papua New Guinea trying a bit of school teaching, and discovered I wasn't much good as a school teacher. And in 1971 I was hoping, by 1970 I been at the university 9 years. I went 6 years part-time and 8 years full-time for the third and fourth year. I won a Commonwealth Scholarship, but the previous years I'd been working and going at night. And so I applied for a research grant to start a PhD in radio astronomy at the University of Adelaide. They'd set up 3 corner reflectors about 100 kilometres apart, one at Buckland Park, one at Kadina up on Upper York Peninsula in the old copper mining triangle, and one at Burra, which is another old copper mining town. So they were basically a triangle about 100 kilometres each leg. And the idea was that they would be looking at basically looking at that stage there was no real.
Okay.
There was no real. You couldn't actually work out the size of these radio sources, and so the idea was you had a very long baseline interferometry, and you'd carry the signals down with a. I think they were going to use a UHF link to carry the actual signal down, so we could time the. Basically, the whole thing is an interferometer with about 100 kilometre legs.
Right.
And unfortunately, the University of Adelaide ran out of money because they'd been expecting the Commonwealth Government to increase their grants every 3 years, and the university had actually overspent its grant, expecting to get more money next year. In the next, it was the last year of the triennium, and I was going for the first year of the next one, and it turned out that the government cut the university's grants by about 30%. So they just didn't have. They offered very few scholarships that year, and I wrote a letter to the University of Otago. I'd heard about them. I knew there was the University of Canterbury in Christchurch, and this University of Otago in a place called Dunedin. Or as I used to say in those days, Dunedin. I learned how to pronounce it properly when I moved there. And I got a letter back from Canterbury saying no, we didn't have any places, and I got a letter back from a fellow called Professor Richard Lindsay Dowden, his name Dick, and he said, "Look, I've got this grant for looking at. Sorry, I've got this project. I've got a small grant for looking at the radio signals from Jupiter, and there's a small allowance attached to it. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yes, please." And so we packed up.
So a decade in New Zealand?
Almost 8.5 years I was in New Zealand. And it turned out that Dick Dowden had done his PhD at the University of Otago, at the University of Tasmania in Hobart, with Graham Ellis, but everyone knew him as Bill. I don't know why, but he was always known as Bill in the trade. And they'd been doing upper atmosphere work, and they'd been looking at Jupiter because they had a big area of land out near Hobart Airport, and they'd built a phased array running from 15 to 17 megs. And
so upper HF.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they'd been looking at Jupiter, and in fact Dick had done a bit of research and confirmed the circular polarization, and that it alternated between as the planet rotated, so it indicated it was coming from the magnetic field, and it was cyclotron radiation of some sort. But there were these millisecond emissions that no one had ever managed to resolve. They were very short, and they obviously had and they were quite narrow band, was the normal emissions or broadband bursts of noise. At that stage, videotape recording, there were several companies, and Philips developed a very early attempt at a domestic video recorder, which had about a 3 meg bandwidth. That was being generous because it wasn't quite just 3 meg bandwidth. It was just adequate for recording black and white television. And Dick apparently wrote to Bill Ellis in Tasmania and said, "You know, if you actually recorded put this thing and you got a 3 meg, converted it down to a video signal, you could record 3 megs of signal on the videotape, and then if you went to this freeze frame mode, you could play it round and round again and actually carefully run a scanning filter up, and you get the spectrum."
Okay.
And Bill Ellis said, "Yeah, that'd be interesting." And then he wrote back to Dick and said, "Yeah, I think I'll give that a try. I've managed to get the university to give me some money. I'm going to get a research student on to have a look at it." And Dick said, about the same time as my letter arrived in Dunedin. So he said, "I'm going to have a go at this." So he persuaded the university to give him I think a grant was only about the total budget for the whole project was about $10,000. You ran on a stick. It was definitely stick, string, and sealing wax in those days.
And you were raising a family and kids.
Well, I had a very young daughter when I arrived. I had 3 kids by the time I finished. Yes, but yes, I was running at 22 to 25 megs.
Yeah.
And the higher the frequency you go, the less common they are. And if I'd have realised how infrequently the high frequency bursts occurred, I would have never started the project.
Okay.
But one condition, everything happened just right, and we had 3 videotapes, and each tape would only last 40 minutes.
Right.
And I decided one night I'd start the recorder because I'd been sitting, hadn't heard much, and I started off, and then just as one of the tapes was about to ring out, and I thought, no, things are right, I heard the signals come in, frantically changed it all round, and yes, the event cap, but all the millisecond bursts I was looking for happened about 20 minutes before I heard the main signal, so I got this whole event. I never got another one.
Oh, right.
And then I had to invent the machine, or develop the machine to analyse them, and about at the end of about a year later, that was working, and Bill had been doing the same in Hobart, and we were swapping bits of information, and he sent us some of his early results, and lo and behold, I saw exactly the same thing, except at the higher frequencies, the drift rates, and between the two of them, we managed to Bill came up with a theory of how they were emitted, which everyone in North America laughed at, but of course they couldn't see Jupiter at the time.
It
and
was
then later
related
results
to
confirmed,
one of Jupiter's moons, wasn't it?
Jupiter, it was coming from the magnetic field of Jupiter, but it was very strongly influenced by the first satellite Io, and basically it was currents flowing up the flux tube, because Io turned out to be a conductor.
Yeah.
It had its own ionosphere. It's now turned out one of the most volcanic objects in the solar system.
But you didn't know that at the time?
No, the first Pioneer probes only went past in 1974.
Right.
So no, there was no. Of course, we know an awful lot about Jupiter because they've had probes going around. Yeah.
That was Mike Roth, VK7MJ, and talking about his work in radio astronomy, for which he gained a PhD at the University of Otago, Dunedin, and he believes, I think, that he was the first and only student to get a PhD in radio astronomy at the University of Otago. But interestingly, Mike found that there was something unique about Jupiter's moon Io, one of the innermost moons of the 4 Galilean moons of Jupiter. And it was only a few years later that I think it was either Viking or Pioneer, I forget which satellite, did a Jupiter flyby and found that Io is so close to Jupiter that it's being stretched and squeezed tidally by Jupiter's immense gravitational forces, and is in fact in a continuous state of eruption, lots of sulfur, a good conductor, and so it acts as a short circuit in Jupiter's magnetic field, and as it sweeps between us and Jupiter, it causes modification of those HF waveforms, and Mike was really the discoverer of the connection of Io before satellites brought the confirmation. So I must say I feel privileged to be a friend of a very bright lad, and I hope Mike is watching. He hates praise, but accept it when it comes, Mike. And thank you for that interview. Apologies, my wife was trying to hurry us on to get moving to get Mike to the airport in time, so you'd hear her voice saying, "Come on, get ready," in the background. Anyway, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission. We'll now stand by on 147.475 for anybody who might like to call back on that frequency. And so now going over to listening on 147.475. Do we have any people who'd like to call back. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, standing by.
Yeah, VK3 ECG.
And VK3ACZ.
Any other takers? We have 3 ECG and 3 ACZ. Okay, it looks like it's just our regulars, Dave and Peter. So, Dave, how's your week been? I hope all that came over okay. I know that there was an echo on the video early on. I had not switched off a monitor channel on the digital throughput to YouTube live stream. It didn't affect the audio transmitted on 2 meters, but unfortunately will affect the live stream. But fortunately, not affecting my narration. Over to you, Dave. How's your week been? VK3CG and group VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and group VK3ECG. Yes, all's been well, and yes, I made a comment on the echo. It was just on the video, as you say, so nothing wrong with the studio microphone stuff, but that was all very good. And the pictures were great. Yes, I like the new electronics emporium near to you, a more efficient space. I actually went to the one in Eltham the other day. I hadn't been there before because I'd normally tend to go sort of the Ringwood direction rather than Eltham, but I went to the Eltham one and it looked very similar to the one you showed actually, with the those little sort of turret things with all the components in, which were quite interesting. The Ringwood one just has the sort of boxes on the shelf still, but the turrets had some. It was actually quite a little bit easier to find things I found on the turrets. Yeah, it certainly is that they've sort of gone a little bit more sort of upmarket in carpeting and fit out and so on. And as you say, it's a place of great attraction. I keep looking at all the batteries and power supply things, but anyway, what else do I have noted down here? Oh yes, it was nice to see Dunedin again. As I think we've said before, I spent some time down there at the summer school. They have a very interesting program for undergraduates whereby they can effectively almost do an additional subject and get their points for their degree by doing a summer school. And I got invited as a visiting sort of professor down at the summer school to help run one of the courses and give a whole series of lectures, including a little public lecture at the end, which was quite fun. And that was, it really was, I always remember turning up at this public lecture, and it had, the clouds had opened. This was January, February or whatever in Dunedin, but even so, although the weather was moderately nice, the downpour came and it was quite dramatic. And I discovered then that I had a sole in my shoe, and everywhere I walked up and down in the lecture theatre, there will be a wet footprint left behind with a slight squelching noise every time I walked anywhere. But I carried on regardless, as they say. Yes, fascinating. It was certainly an interesting place to be, and it's a beautiful university and a beautiful city, actually, as you say, and with the Octagon and so on, and sitting in the cafes around there, which was very nice. And the station is quite dramatic. I went with my daughter, and she went off on some train trips, things, the little tourist train or whatever, while I was working. But it was certainly a lovely place to visit. Yes, and the film of ASE's Garage Shack or Shed Shack, whatever it was it's just quite incredible, really, when you think about it. And yes, you're absolutely right. The broadcast is going strong, and indeed, if anything, I agree with you. The propagation seems to be better. I was listening at 2.311, and that was very strong this evening, actually. Anyway, enough from me. Back to you, and good evening to everybody else as well who may be listening and so on. And we'll no doubt hear more perhaps when we get to the Zoom, if we get to a Zoom. Back to you. VK3ECG.
VK3CG and group VK3AML. Well, thanks for that, Peter. Yeah, I always regarded Dave's shack as fairly phenomenal, as much for the fact that he put it together for a very modest price. I mean, he's hovered over Historical Radio Society auctions and hamfests, buying up old second-hand, generally professional audio equipment. Doesn't matter if it's last year's model. If it's 10 years ago, it's still quite usable if it's professional. And if there's anything wrong with it, he fixes it up, presses it into service, and of course he's ended up with what amounts to a very operable broadcast station. And for years I think he was frustrated by the sort of negative feedback that some of the Mother Grundys and doomsayers within ham radio leap on the bandwagon. Oh, that's illegal. It's something that I wouldn't do. That I get all too often, even for these Saturday night transmissions. So Dave, I think, eventually just said, look, Radio Australia has vacated 2310 and 4835. I wonder if the frequencies are available. It wouldn't take much to change my existing transmitters to suit those frequencies, and that's exactly what he's done. He's got himself 60 acres, about 20 kilometres north of Bendigo, a lockable, as I understand it, series of old shipping containers on the property, as well as two or three, well, one major house and two or three smaller ones. And away he goes. So as long as he can look after the 60 acres, and as long as it doesn't go underwater, as of course much has the last few days, I gave him I gave his wife a quick text message, "Are you okay?" 48 hours ago, and she said, look, we're not near any flood area. There are no major watercourses near them, so they're reasonably okay. But friends in Rochester have not been so lucky. I don't have anybody I know who's in the Maribyrnong Valley, but I believe that there are something in the order of 500 houses that have been badly affected in various parts of Victoria: Charlton, Shepparton, Rochester up north, Maribyrnong chiefly in Melbourne's west. So over to Peter, 3ACZ, and curious to know whether you've noticed anything particularly about HF propagation. I have noticed that Dave's 4835 signal has been steadily getting better. VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ. Good evening, Chris, and good evening, Dave, and listeners. No, I haven't noticed. I've made a little mental note to make sure that I tune in. Again, I haven't for a couple of weeks. Propagation was a bit poor earlier this afternoon. The K-index got up to 5, but things improved by late afternoon. Got into Denmark on 40 metres on the grey line, which was nice. A couple of Jota stations in England generally had a good time. But back to the subject of tonight's broadcast, Chris, you said that words to the effect of that tonight had been patched together in a hurry. It certainly didn't look that way. It had the usual slick presentation and all. Chris, you'll get no sympathy from me for a toy emporium opening up near you. This week, against my will, I had a brand new Yaesu FT710 follow me home from the toy shop, so had to take it out this afternoon to test it, but again, no sympathy from me. The money's there to get spent, hi. The repeater coverage, yes, I have an interesting time. I look forward to the Troppo and getting down to VK7. Mount William's my nearest 245 k's from me. There's the 6 2-metre and 70 centimetre repeaters, and I swear I don't understand how Troppo works, because I'll usually get into 1, sometimes 2, but never all 3. Same with getting down to VK7. There's the 3 bands there, and It'll usually be one of them. Had a very interesting time with Peter Parker, 3 Yankee Echo, and actually I made a short little snippet on one of his videos there where he was going down to VK7 on 2 metres and I was going down there on 70 centimetres, and we got joined up in the link system they have down there, and so that was good fun. Dave Shack, yeah, that's what I wish my shack looked like. Hi, that's as much as I'll say about that. Rugby Radio, my highlight of the night, Chris, really enjoyed that. Now, did I hear right? Did I hear the guy sitting at the control desk, or whatever it's called, did I hear the words QSY mentioned? I'm pretty sure I did. I was impressed. And as for Longwave, a reminder of what it was, when I was over in England and Ireland, I listened to Longwave all the time, even though I could have had the medium wave or FM broadcast, just because I could. Driving around in the car in Ireland, listen to Longwave all the time because of the novelty factor, and anybody not from Australia listening to this, we really only have the NDB from aerodromes and all that on our Longwave. We don't have anything like that for commercial or government broadcasting. Good to see Dunedin again. I was reminded when I was there, I can't even recall which year now, but it snowed on Christmas Eve in Dunedin, and that was in the main street, not up on that big hill. And I had a bit of a chuckle to myself hearing Prue calling out too. That gave it a nice, your interview, a nice little homely touch there. It was all very good. Anyway, a greatly enjoyed broadcast. Back to you, Chris, and thanks for sharing it with us. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
Have we any other breakers before I continue? VK3AML? Oh, it's a quiet night on 2 metres. VK3ACZ in group VK3 Alpha Mike Lima. A Yaesu FT710. I'll have to get some more information on why you got that particular one next round. I know that you're collecting Baofengs in every imaginable permutation and colour. Not sure exactly why. They must look nice all spread out on a shelf. At least when you look at them, they don't produce spurs. Not unless you push certain buttons. And it's interesting what you say about ducting, working on one band but not another. I've frequently seen that. The other thing I've noticed about ducting is that's one of the modes of communication, particularly VHF, where your height above sea level seems not to matter. In fact, in many cases, I've found, listening to people working into Tasmania, that people that are low down near the seashore get through better than people who are sitting nearby on mountain tops, if they get through at all. It's like you have to launch into a pipe, and if you're too high, you can't launch into that pipe. It's very interesting. And as you say, sometimes one part of a band will propagate and not another. Presumably it has something to do with refractive indices of the duct, the change of temperature with height or whatever. I mean, there must be variable refractive index with different temperatures and pressures of air being in close proximity, just as there are with different types of glass, or the junction between glass and air with optical frequencies. You went to a new electronic emporium in Eltham, Dave. The same brand name? I'm just curious. And yeah, Dunedin, very fond of the place. The only thing I had against it, living there a few days, we stayed, Mike and I, at a guest house, an old-style guest house of, dare I say it, the almost faulty towers type, but with more pleasant management, called the Sahara. And anything less like the Sahara you can think of in Dunedin, I can't imagine. There were sandblasted windows in this place with pictures of Arabs on camels with the pyramids in the background. And considering that in midsummer, a chap that I spoke to sitting near me for lunch said, "Gee, it's a hot day, mate." It must be 20 degrees, which indicated something about what Dunedin must be like in winter. Anyway, round to you, Dave, with a pause for anybody who'd like to break in. VK3CG and group VK3AML.
Yes, VK3ECG. Yes, no, I didn't hear anything, but I left a little bit of a gap because sometimes I don't hear some of the other stations, at least not as easily. Yes, no, I know exactly what you mean. So I had a few nice days in Dunedin, and as I said, went round to the Albatross colony and went up the hills and bits and pieces like that, and met a few people and friends in my general business area. So it was certainly a nice trip, and I enjoyed my time there. The rugby radio. I mean, the thing that really struck me about that video, which I loved, I thought the issues with the weather going the towers, but the most significant thing I thought was the fact that the riggers were all wearing shirts with ties, and they were wearing their ties. Now, I thought that was pretty impressive, actually. I couldn't imagine that happening much today. Whether, of course, they were wearing the ties because that was the expected dress for a rigger, or whether, in fact, they were wearing their ties because they were being filmed that day, is, I suppose, open to some doubt. But yes, Longwave. I mean, yes, Radio 4. When I listened to Radio 4 as a child and so on, it was all Longwave, and all those wonderful Sunday afternoon sort of comedy things, Round the Horn and things like that were all sort of Radio 4 on Longwave and so on. So it was very popular. Yes, I'm very impressed, Peter, with the FT710. I have to admit, I did go around to the Emporium this week and finally acquired a UHF mobile dubander, which I have. I've been using this mixed HF VHF rig, which has been fine. But I really want to have a go at having a proper small rig that I can take out of the car if I want to, and things like that. At the moment it's sitting here, so that's what I'm using at the moment. So I hope my audio is okay, and I think you already acquired one of these, Peter. So we shall have to have some a go at some fusion at some stage. So that was the FTM 300, which is very nice. But I did have a look at the FT710 while I was there, which was demonstrated to me with that interesting audio spread audio field speaker system they've got, which certainly seems fairly effective. You can get the same sort of effect actually with if you have dual receive on the radio by just having the stations just a tiny bit tuned differently, and you'll find you get a very interesting sort of acoustic sort of stage in front of you, which actually does help you pull out when you've got a crush of stations in a pile-up. It actually does help pull things out. Very neat little radio though, very neat indeed, and certainly something that would be easy to move around and take portable and things like that. So I'm sure you'll enjoy that very much. I must admit, Chris, I was just thinking about when you were talking about the lenses or perhaps it was Mike talked about lenses with the epidiascopes. I used to work using a lights epidiascope, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing for showing physical objects and then projecting them up on the wall and things like that. A great sort of machine, and I bet if there's a few of those around, being in some sort of second-hand scientific place or whatever, they'd be quite impressive instruments. The arc lamps on them were incredible, and when we used to use them to show pathology objects and project them. Look, before the days of microscope cameras and things like that, we actually had an arc lamp lit microscope with a prism which would throw the image onto the wall. The only problem was that when you actually put a stained specimen slide on the stage of the microscope and looked at it on the wall with a group of people for more than about 30 seconds, the arc lamp would bleach the stain out of the tissue, and so the specimens had to be restained again. But then, anyway, back to you. VK3AML and the group VK3ECG.
VK3ECG and group VK3AML. Yeah, I actually bought from a local tip shop about 18 months ago an epidioscope, a magnificent big lens in the thing, about 7 inches diameter. I think it's either a Cook triplet or a Petzval lens, multiple lenses in it, very heavy, big thing, and it uses a single 1,000-watt incandescent source with a lot of air blowing and dichroic mirrors to get rid of heat, but it can quite comfortably project the page of a book up on a screen. Can't think of a use for it, but the lens, if ever I do experiments needing a very fast, very big lens, I'll certainly use that. But Peter, I'm very curious. Oh, one thing I do remember, many years ago, there was a ham I knew. I'm just trying to think of his name. Won't come to me. He lived in North Balwyn, and he had an analytical stereoscopic microscope. It might have been a Lights microscope that used a tiny arc lamp. I mean, you know, when we think of an arc lamp, you think of carbon pencils that are made to be 1/4 of an inch thick and separated by 1/10 of an inch with intense light coming out of them. This thing used what looked like pencil leads, like they were a 1/16 of an inch in diameter at the most, and you would bring them together and then pull them apart slightly to give you an extremely intense light source that could be focused through the system. Particularly for dark field microscopy, it was absolutely wonderful. But as you say, the amount of UV coming out of that thing must have been such that if you had any live specimen in there, they were probably fried by the time that you finished looking at them, whether they were, you know, plankton or microbes or amoeba or whatever. So over to Peter. Tell us something about the Yaesu FT710, why you got it, what particular thing it does that you haven't been able to do so far, and we'll see what sort of justification you can provide. VK3 ACZ and group, VK3AML. And after this round, I must go over to poor old Rolly, who's waiting as usual in Auckland in the wee hours of the morning on live stream. VK3ACZ. I will dash to the other room for Call of Nature, but I'll be able to hear you on the loudspeaker while you're talking. VK3ACZ and group, VK3AML.
VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ. Well, Chris, you got me worried, because if I justify the... I don't know how to justify the purchase of the Yaesu FT710 other than to say if you haven't got one, it's a genuine reason to purchase one. No, really, my view is that it's Yaesu's answer to the question that nobody has asked. It's a competition, as far as I can tell, for the ICOM 7300, and I'm interested in portable, as you know, and do a bit of portable, and I was interested to see how they would compare. Today it was out today for my first test, and it performed very, very well, so I'm quite happy with it. Unlike earlier in the week, I was out with the SHORTWAVE Radio Club, Chris. We had our little camp up there near Rushworth, a place called RU. That's Whiskey Hotel Romeo Oscar, I think. And one of the things I found out there is that I need to go further afield even than that. We had 7 members, and Sandra and Mrs. Volker came along as well. So there are a few of us there, but most of the people spent all day charging our batteries with solar panels, and the QR Mary was absolutely ghastly, and I had trouble working a bit of DX. I got into... the States, east coast of the States on 10 metres one morning. That was kind of a buzz, but it looks like if I go on any more of these radio camps, I'm going to have to settle, drive a half a mile away to get away from everybody. Oh dear. Anyway, and as for the floods, yes, well, most people listening in will know that Victoria's been pretty heavily hit in some areas. We were, Sandra and I were drenched on Wednesday morning by the rain that was supposed to come on Wednesday night. So we got home in pouring, drenching rain there. Anyway, enough of that. Dave, your FTM 300, goodbye, good purchase. I have one of those myself. It's my satellite radio. I've heard myself coming back from the International Space Station on the dual receive. Good radio, and you sounded pretty good too, Dave. I'm actually speaking on the 200. Again, did I need an FTM 200? No, not having one is a genuine reason to purchase. Anyway, enough of that. I'm hoping Rolly's going to be in the Zoom meeting because I've been watching some of his YouTube videos during the week, and I'd like to make a comment. And Chris, I see in the live chat that Clint Jeffrey, VK3CSJ, is aboard. Fantastic.
Hi, Clint.
Because hearing about Jupiter, the very first thing I thought of is that Clint would be interested in hearing that. So all good. Anyway, the ASU FT710, yeah. It'll probably be my replacement for the 7300. The only thing, I might have to put my own voltmeter on it because I won't know when the portable batteries are going to run down. Fun times. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
VK3ACZ and the group VK3AML. Yeah, okay. Well, what I must do is go out to the Emporium, as you refer to it, Bayswater, I presume you're talking about, and have a look for myself. Just to see what people are talking about. I have no equipment here that goes higher than 70 centimetres, and if there's anything on 1296 that's worth listening to, satellites or whatever, I'd be curious. Interesting that you went back to Wuru. I think that's the second time that the club's been out that direction. I'm just glad that nobody got stuck in the floods. I mean, there have been a few bridges that have got washed out, particularly on secondary roads. But my heart goes out to those people in Maribyrnong particularly, who have houses that are full of mud. You can imagine the stench quite apart from the damage. Terrible. There'll be quite a few people who have unlivable homes for some time, I should imagine. Okay, back to Dave for the next one, about the light sepidoscope and the arc lamps used for microscopes. I should add the microscope I saw, which had these little pencil arc carbons. That would have been 40 years ago that I saw it, and it was considered to be an old piece of equipment then. I think they used something like a xenon arc after that, but with some sort of dichroic arrangement to get rid of the the infrared and the heat. Or they put it through some sort of a solution of alum or something, transparent box with glass sides with some sort of material that would absorb the heat past the light. Over to you, Dave, and then we'll go to YouTube chat. YouTube chat. Zoom. VK3ECG and group, VK3AML.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group VK3ECG. Yes, exactly. These epidoscopes and the projectine microscope, it was a bit odd in a way because the microscope cameras weren't too bad in those days, the digital video cameras, and so certainly for the specimen cameras that they used to use in lecture theatres. But this was it was one of those sort of weekly meetings of all the people for a whole variety of different hospitals all scattered around Bristol, including the vets, actually, all the veterinary pathologists, which was quite fun, actually. But they would gather in this large room in almost a hall, actually, in the old Bristol Children's Hospital. And these two pieces of really ancient equipment, and they were ancient when we were using them, will be wheeled out from some sort of cupboard and switched on. They took a long time to come up to light, of course, with the little arc lamp systems they had built in. And they were these little miniature arc things, but they took quite a time to come up. I don't know the full technology because I never took one apart or anything, but it was quite dramatic because all the sort of the slides that we'd be using were biopsies from people and specimens and things like this, and they were all stained with a hemotoxin acid, which is a pink and a dark blue stain. The dark blue stains the nuclei and the pink stains the cytoplasm, to put it in a general sort of sense. So they were quite brightly coloured. You could hold them up in the light and then they looked like quite a bright sort of pinky blue a picture. But once you'd put them under this arc lamp, it would just bleach the stain out of the slides. And you could see this happening on the wall. And if you steered around the slide, you literally you'd leave a track of pallor on the slide, which was actually visible when you held it up to the light. So they were quite powerful things, actually. Yes, the signals. It hasn't been quite as good the DX this last week. I got into 15 metres a bit, and certainly was working out into some Pacific Islands, so which was nice, talking on 15 metres, and that seemed to be a little bit better than it has been, but haven't had some sort of wonderful afternoons in quite the same way as we had a little while ago. But as you say, it changes from time to time. And yes, the interesting thing about the ducting issues on VHF, I remember when I was at university in Nottingham in England, we had a whole load of these little converted taxi sideband little transceivers. They had, I think it was just a variable crystal oscillator or something that they ran on, but and none of us were all in sort of hall of residence type places, so there was no real ability to put up any decent sort of antennas. But I remember sticking a halo loop out of the window, and one evening it was sort of a strange sort of foggy, misty winter, and all of a sudden there I was in the middle of England, talking to stations in North France on sideband, with just a halo antenna stuck out of a student window at a funny angle. And I mean, normally you didn't get very far on these things at all. There it was, just extraordinary, these weird ducting effects that you do get from time to time. Well, I'm sure, Pete, that you are enjoying that FT710. I must admit, when it was demonstrated to me, it certainly looks very, very neat, I have to say. And I presume it's a little bit smaller than your the 7300, and certainly has it's a good receiver, and that's the great thing about them. Perhaps not quite all the bells and whistles that the DX10 has, but it's a different radio, and it's much smaller, and obviously much easier to travel with and so on when you're setting up. And so it'll be interesting to see how you go in comparison with the IC7300. Interesting to find out about that, and we must have a fusion at some point as well. Anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML in the group, VK3ECG.
VK3ECG in the group, and we've got the guys up on Zoom chat. We've got Peter 3ACZ and Rolly. Just hang on a sec. I'll try and get rid of some of the screen flare. It's still flaring a bit. I'll see if I can get rid of this. So, Rolly, how have you been? I think we've got audio on for you, unless I'm mistaken.
I'm not sure. Have you got some audio from me there?
Yep,
Can you hear me okay?
No problem at all.
Then.
Hang on. He said, holding up the microphone. Is that better?
Oh, that's fine. There's no trouble at all, either or either.
Okay, okay. Yeah, are you very familiar with Dunedin, coming from the other end of
Yeah, I mean, that was interesting footage you had there, because I'm very, very familiar with Mount Cargill. That's where one of our commercial, when I was involved commercially with commercial broadcasting, we had an FM station up there.
Oh, right.
And for the local Dunedin crowd. And those dishes that you saw, Peter, is obviously summertime, because in the wintertime they have a cone out the front of them to cover all the whole dish off, so that when you get snow and ice on it, it doesn't you don't ice up your dish.
Yeah,
and those dishes are also heated as well, so that
we did notice that the tower was covered with signs saying "Do not stand under tower, falling ice." So I gathered that Dunedin was not always as idyllic as the way we saw it.
There's been several occasions where the only way we could get into there, because to do any maintenance, was to do helicopter in.
Whoa!
Yeah, the road up which is closed.
Yeah, I met an old chap who had been an engineer for the Dunedin TV, ZL4LV, Peter. I forget his second name. And he was very knowledgeable about that area. Of course, he'd been up there many, many times, and he tended to accept with open arms any cast-off, particularly transmitting gear from that area that he could get his hands on. So his house. Well,
that's one of the nice things of being from ex-broadcasting. Get some of the gear that came out of dismantled AM stations, you know.
In actual fact, the thing that intrigued me was he had a Marconi television camera from about 1964, an image orthicon camera, and it's just amazing the amount of electronics that was required to produce even a 625 line image near the edge of resolution, compared to what we can do now with a bloody webcam, and it's in colour. I mean, really.
Or just these things here, you know.
Yes.
The results you can get out of it. In fact, just as I was retiring from the broadcasting station, as the chief engineer for them for many years, and we had a television station as well. Now, we used to send out our guys with an iPhone to just do interviews, street interviews and news clips and that sort of stuff. Instead of sending out a film crew with the big cameras and the one guy carrying the camera and the other guy carrying the battery pack and somebody else carrying, etc., you send them out with an iPhone. And we had very little post-production. You could just almost put it straight to air.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's happened to me when I've been interviewed. They've got me on occasions to have the iPhone on one hand and the telephone on the other hand. They'd ask me the questions on the telephone. I'd record, just ordinary plain recording on the iPhone, and then email them the recording. That's pretty much standard for those sort of radio interviews now.
Yeah, and it's of such a quality that it can go straight to air just about. There's very little post-production you have to do.
Yeah. And in fact, these days, I mean, the last time I got interviewed, I think it was it was Channel 9 or something like that. And I said I wasn't working, and I said I'm not going into the city. You can film me down in Warrandyte, and so they roll up at the bridge, and it's one guy. He's part-time. He's building his house. He only works about 1 day a week. So they sent him down. He's got his camera. He's got all his gear there. He does everything himself. He's just using his mobile phone to send the stuff back.
Thing that I've noticed is
if you really want to get smart, you roll out your portable green screen and get him to stand in front of that. And now you can put you anywhere you like.
Yeah,
exactly. I think they want to be in front of
Don't believe what you're seeing on the camera.
I was just going to say that this whole area seems to have been accelerated in development by the advent of COVID. I mean, everybody going on to webcams. When I bought the first of the C930 webcams about a month into COVID, they'd become almost unobtainable for about 3 months. I had to get this one ex-stock from someplace in Cairns, I think it was, and have them send it, the same distance I would be away from Raleigh. But I do know
for some time now, Chris, we've had one of our announcers who lives in Nelson, but our broadcast studios are in Auckland, and he does his morning show from Nelson.
Really?
Yeah.
Just at home Skype or something.
Yeah, and live, and of course a lot of the station is pre-recorded. But if you're listening to it, you've got no idea that there's nobody actually in the studio.
No.
Yeah, our ABC presenters were doing the same thing during the worst of COVID. That breakfast show on 774 was done remotely.
Yes, that's right.
Oh, it's so easy done now.
Yeah. Well, I was running quite a lot of courses, and the whole thing was being run remotely. And I set up a nice Rode microphone on a boom, and I had it in front of my camera system. And I actually, for a while, as I said, I think I said before, I used a Fuji H1 sort of, not one of these, not SLR cameras now, but but with the nice Fuji lenses on it, and I basically took the HDMI out of that, and then I had a coupling box, and I put it back in the computer, and but actually it all worked pretty well. And the great advantage there was, of course, you had a good, decent lens, which meant that you didn't need to have so much lighting because you were capturing so much more light in a large camera lens, and that's what made the difference.
Yeah.
You just didn't have to worry about having additional lighting or anything.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly going ahead very quickly, and the thing I mostly notice, Rolly, the guy in Nelson, would you know whether he's using Skype as the conveying medium or something? Is there a professional version? Or?
No, we've set up a VPN from his place over our own VPN.
So it's broader bandwidth than you would get through Skype or Zoom or something like that.
Yeah. The bigger thing that is you can go live with it because of the low latency. That's only about less than 10 milliseconds latency. You see.
Right. I mean, one of the things that I'm attracted to is the idea of buying a software-defined transceiver and at least putting the receive side outside the metro area of Melbourne. It's just become impossible to receive a decent signal on HF with so much noise around from switch mode supplies and all that sort of stuff. But the thing against it...
Tell me about it.
The thing against it...
I'm sure we could actually run video over the link, and the biggest problem with running video over a link using Skype or any other thing is of course lip sync. So now you have to go into extraordinary sort of lengths of getting delaying the audio and all that sort of stuff. Well, over a direct VPN, you'd be very hard pressed to see any lip sync problems.
Yes. I mean, in the case of remote receiver operation, it's the latency. I mean, sometimes the Kiwi SDR receivers seem to have a latency of up to 30 seconds, and you can imagine that particularly if you're trying to run crossband duplex, it'd be just about impossible. Simplex difficult, but it's the latency that's the main thing against the software.
Well, I've got an Kiwi SDR running, and it's got less than a second latency.
Right.
I can use it with FT8. So there you go.
Are you running a Kiwi SDR there, Rolly?
I opened my mouth, didn't I?
I'm just wondering which one it is on the map. But it's the one at Rotorua.
Well, put it this. Oh, the Rotorua one's great.
Yeah.
Not all SDRs are listed. There you go.
Yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I've been trying to persuade the guys down at Awarua that maybe an SDR down at Invercargill might be or south of Invercargill particularly might be a good idea. but they have some sort of ionospheric radar running fairly close to where that radio museum is, and there may be some pulse noise problems there. I don't know.
There's no, I'll leave that one.
Ionospheric sounding of some kind. I forget the name of it. It had a name that was quoted to me at the time.
I can get myself in a lot of trouble with you guys.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I suppose a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Sorry, I find them very helpful for doing my audio settings. That 3 second or so delay is absolutely perfect. But Rolly, just quickly, I've been watching your YouTube videos this week, and I want to say a big thank you. But first of all, I think I mentioned a week or two ago that I've only worked one DX, well, if you don't call ZL DX, the States once on 80 metres. I got very jealous, especially of your visit to, was it One India Uniform or Uniform India? That was a fantastic little one. But I got to tell you, I enjoyed you interviewing your wife. That was extra special, Gail. So thank you for that. Anyway, back to the subject.
Well, what subject were we talking about? Because those are the sorts of things you can find if you're an ex-broadcaster.
Oh.
That's big and chunky. The good old rotary inductor.
Yes, noisy but useful.
Oh yeah, couple that up with something like that. You got to have a healthy horse to lift, you know.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah. I thought it was a cheese grater.
Yeah, it is.
You probably could.
I'm told you need to use toothpaste and a soft toothbrush.
All right.
And both of those are very handy when you're on 160 metres and you want to run a little bit of horsepower.
I've often thought with an inverted L, if I could get a sort of an insulating rod up to the turning thing on one of those roller inductors and put the roller inductor between the horizontal section of the inverted L and the vertical section, I should be able to get a 160 metre tuning pretty well. I can't see anything against it.
Well, those components need a tower of their own to hold them.
Well, yeah. I've got a steel mast here, that helps. I tried an aluminium mast, but it turned into a letter S after the first wind that it got, so switched to steel. It's a lot heavier and harder to get up, but it'll stay there even without guy wires. Yeah. But yeah, what can you tell me, Rolly? I believe, from what I've been told by KA7OEI, that the Kiwi SDRs have ceased production. And
that's correct. You can't get them now.
Oh dear.
Sadly, no.
Does that mean that the whole network will eventually decay, or what?
Oh, I'm not sure about that. I don't think so, but I don't know why. I don't know any of the politics or anything like that. I just know that they've ceased production on the SDRs. I have noticed that a few have come up on the likes of eBay and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Well, takes your chances is what I'm saying though.
There's been a few like that, haven't there? Copy things coming through, and then they're all out there.
Pardon my ignorance, but I assume with the name Kiwi SDR that the things were derived either from research in New Zealand or by being manufactured in New Zealand. Would that be right?
Oh, research from. Yeah.
Right. Oh, it'll be very disappointing.
There are a couple of Chinese knockoffs hanging around, but
I see Ardra.
And there's and there are other things that probably could be modified to become that. The whole thing about it was you had the two boards and it was all synchronized, sort of designed to work together. Which was the great thing about them.
Exactly. I'm confident that somebody will pick it up and or pick up the equivalent thereof. And I mean, the Kiwi SDR is not the only SDR in existence.
No.
And they have their quirks as well.
Yes.
The other one's University of Twente and all of the SDRs that came from that. But I've noticed that using those SDRs, I think they must have variable bit rate audio transmission, because if you try to receive SSTV direct from one of those University of Twente SDRs, the sync goes like sinuously down the screen, as if it's shifting continuously in frequency. Very, very odd. Kiwi SDRs seem to be just a straight, 12 kilohertz sampling wave file, and that's it. Whereas I think the
there's a truckload of setup you can do, or configuration you can do with these things. It just goes on and on and on and on. Depends on how deep you want to get into the mire.
Yes. Well, it'd be interesting to have one of them on some uninhabited place, like. Well, the trouble is there you'd have to arrange satellite internet connection, and that would be fairly expensive. Some place like Auckland Island, I was thinking. Presumably that'd be fairly clear of tropical storm interference and all the rest of it. That was why I was thinking of...
No, not necessarily, because you're so far south that the auroral zone really plays havoc.
Okay.
Particularly on your 10 metres and even 15 metres. It just... It can be quite fearsome, that's for sure.
So what would be the optimum latitude? Around Dunedin or someplace around there, or what exactly? Because there aren't too many web SDRs in the South Island of New Zealand, is the sad thing.
Maharao is the only one, I think.
And that's not one of the best, unfortunately. It seems to only cover a narrow part of HF adequately. Rotorua is somewhat better. The one that was outstanding was Bay of Islands, but I think that's gone.
That one's gone. There's one in Wanganui, which is not pretty good.
Okay, I'll give that a try. Do you use the web SDRs very much, Peter, or is that something that you tend to avoid for the sake of challenging yourself with hardware?
Oh, well, as I said, when testing my audio compression and processing, whatever, I find them very helpful for that. But there are times when I'll call CQ late at night and get no answer, and it's just reassuring to know that, I'm being heard in Rotorua, or I'm being heard in Perth, or that sort of thing. When Clint does his Friday night broadcasts with the Astronomical Society of Victoria, I often listen to him and find out where he's getting out, and sometimes it's the west coast of California there on 80 metres. I never seem to hear him too far on 160, but again, I like tuning in for those reasons.
Yeah, it is really good to be able to monitor our own signal as well. I think it really does help. And as you say, it just gives you a sense of what is happening. And in fact, if you move around a bit, you're putting out the same sort of signal. You get quite a good pattern about where things are going, a bit like your own whisper system.
Yeah, I've often, when people have said to me that they use WSJT to work out where they're getting out to, I always say, why don't you use a web SDR and just talk into the microphone? It's good, if not better. So, it's... sorry,
I've got one of these little... Yeah, I've got one of these little purpose-built 300 milliwatt whisper transmitters, which I'll sometimes just sit up there and just run on my main antenna for 2 or 3 days just to see what's happening. And you look at the map and you can see the stuff laid out, and you want to fiddle with the antenna and see if it just has a quantum increase or decrease in performance, and it's quite good for that, because it's going over a period of time, so you get the whole of that time. That sort of things, and they're really very useful.
What's that, Rolly? Is that a Kiwi SDR?
That's a little transmitter which puts out. Yeah. Oh, this is a half watt job. So I just put that up, run that on whisper half a watt into whatever antenna I got, and then come back and have a look and see what it's done over.
See what it's done,
over a period of time.
Yeah. Actually,
it's only a good way of checking antennas.
Sorry. My apologies if I seem to be talking over people. I mean, it's difficult with the delay between the various people here to know where to stick in the comment without being seen as a dick. One of the local gurus on amateur television was demonstrating at one of the radio clubs I went to, complete ATV station in a dongle, capable of putting out enough 1.2 gig output to hit the local repeater and get himself out all over the Melbourne area. So I mean, this stuff is becoming pathetically simple. It really is.
Well, it's not simple, but it's certainly small.
Yes, yeah. Well, working out all of the compression details can be a little bit overwhelming. But as long as you have some guru out there prepared to guide you, it's okay.
That's right.
Any other news, Rolly, of things that are going on in New Zealand?
Oh no, not really. I noticed that the bands are hopping pretty well. I mean, 15 meters for me is still open here. I can. It's what time is it in the morning? I don't know, some hour in the morning. But 15 meters, pounding away on CW down the bottom of there, and getting quite a few European contacts and so on. So,
it'd be just coming up to 2 a.m. where you are, Rolly. I feel guilty every time I see you on there, but it's lovely to have you anyway.
It is 1:58. Yeah, there you go. This is a la normal for me.
If I did that to my wife, I think I'd be served with divorce papers. You heard her chipping into that interview with Mike. She's the good organiser out of the two of us, and if I'm dragging my feet on organisation, you'll hear her in the background saying something to that effect, and I get ribbed about petticoat government, but if she wasn't there, I'd be totally disorganised.
There is an answer to that, Chris.
What, a divorce?
No.
Trade her in on an IC710 or something.
No.
I wouldn't dare.
Get her to set the license and get her to get her own calls.
Oh, that would be divorce material for me.
That's the only reason why Gail got a license. Really, was to. Well, if this guy's going to go running around islands all over the place, and in those days there was no email or anything like that.
Yeah.
So she said, "Oh, sod it! I'll get a license. At least I can talk to my husband, and the kids can say hello as well." So.
Well, when I first met Prue, and this is going back 30 years, she was interested to know what I was talking about when I was talking about modulated light. So I took a small twin lens unit round to her flat, opened the window, and I shone the high intensity LED through the lens system out to a nearby building. And she looks at me with this completely astonished look and says, "Here I am, a single girl, and you're shining bright red lights out of my window?" So I didn't try again. I tried to get her interested in the ham license. She said, look, you go ahead, you play your ham radio. At least I know on a Saturday night where you bloody well are. You're not at the pub spending the money."
There you go.
It's like the old joke, isn't it, of the old lady talking about her husband always going off to the men's club in the city, and she's saying, "Well, I'm not too worried about it." She said, "The most important thing is that I know where he is, and what's more, he knows where he is."
Yeah, I guess there's that to it.
Yeah, Rolly, I thought Gail came across very well in your interview. I got my Sandra to listen to it in the faint hope that it might inspire her.
Right, yeah.
Sandra is highly tolerant. I've seen her tolerate you on many occasions, Peter, particularly on field days. As long as she gets her little nature walk in, she'll be happy. And give her my best, won't you?
Yeah, and same to Prue. And she's very good when we go on the radio camps too. It was extra better because Mrs. Volker came along this time, so she had another lady to chat with. But it's good that she comes along on those camps.
Yeah, it's a pity we can't get Volker onto these crossbands. He's quite a conversationalist, and he keeps in touch with everything going on back in Europe on a fairly constant basis. So it's very interesting to get his slant on, dare I say it, on ham radio, the Ukraine situation.
Yeah, and as I found out, he speaks 4 languages too. His wife is French, and he's German, of course. And very interesting.
Yeah. from southern Germany somewhere, I think. I'm not quite sure exactly where. But yeah, because of proximity, you see, Rolly, he's the guy who drives me home. I've never had a car licence. I'm one of those eccentrics who uses public transport. But getting home from the radio club, which is about 10 k's from here in that direction, Volker lives very close to me, so he gives me a ride home, and he's usually very philosophical about what he says about international politics. He's one of those rare people who can see both sides of every situation. And he's pulled me up on a few occasions when I've been all gung-ho for Ukraine, and two sides to this. Anyway. Yeah. Well, the IC, what was it, the FT710? You didn't have any trouble with Sandra about that, Peter?
What she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. No, that's not true.
That's
no, it's okay. Long as I promise each time it'll be the last radio, and she believes me.
Oh my God! How many last times have there been now? Every you've got about 20 Baofengs, haven't you? In every possible colour.
No. Well, I'd rather you didn't publicise that. I am a bit embarrassed about that. They're not my go-to radio, by the way.
No, I'm aware of that.
I am a Yaesu man.
You've got an FT5D, haven't you? Please.
I have, yes, and a 3 and a 2 and the 70 and the 6 VX6.
I thought I was bad, but
oh well.
There are people out there, I know. Early CB radios are becoming collectibles now, because the earliest of them are something in excess of 60 years old. I mean, there's one guy I know who had a CB radio from America, and it was Valve. And that's 3VJS. He had one back in the 60s when you had to get some sort of a special mobile license for them. It was available if you had a demonstrated business need. But that's one of the very few Valve CBs I've heard of. Of course, 90% of them were from the mid-60s onwards were solid state. But there's a guy I know who's got at least 150 CB radios in a huge collection. He lives down... what is it? Down near Warrigal somewhere. He's been in it since it was legalised in Australia, which was, I think, the middle of 1977. So he's got quite a few stashed away there. I don't know whether all of them would be illegal or not. I don't know whether you had this situation, Rolly, but in Australia, we first of all, when CBs first hit the market, they were 23 channel. Then, for the sake of making a local manufacturing industry of one manufacturer viable, they switched to a 16-channel system which nobody could enforce, some of which coincided with the American system. Then they switched to 40 channels, and I think it's changed again since, as a result of which the whole of 27 megs is a total hodgepodge. And UHF-CB in Australia is a half a hodgepodge. And we got 10 minutes left, I know.
It's a similar scenario here in New Zealand. I personally never been involved in the CB scene at all. So the nearest to CB, I guess, was going down to this years ago. We're going down to a local car park where the kids were running around with their 27 meg cars,
Yes,
and getting on the ham band and going finding what frequency they're and going and put a carrier of 100 watt in there or something like that, and see a car just disappear across the car park, and some kid going
splat goes the front end.
Hey, Rolly, I've got a question for you. ICOM, Yaesu, Kenwood, which are you?
Well, you're talking to a guy who used to have the ICOM agency here in New Zealand.
Oh, that's right. So you're Yaesu then, right? No.
Yeah, there you go. To be honest, my go-to would be Elecraft, so there you go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I've got an Elecraft KX3. That's the little 10 watt thing. I use that a lot when I'm doing mobile stuff or parks on the air or something like that. Although lately I've been using the Icon 7300 for parks on the air. And then I also have a Elecraft K3. That's the
the main The K4's that now, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, the reason why I got the K3 on to be fair was I was going to use it as a remote station, and that time when the K3 came out, there was the bee's knees for
you get a
remote.
That's right. Yeah.
Get it going. But I had that as a remote for a while, but it's back here at the home station now.
Yeah.
Preference between Yaesu, Kenwood, and Icon, whatever spins your whizzer, go for it.
Yeah.
I mean,
I think they're all
at the end of the day, we're only talking about a knob here or a knob there, or a little thing here or a little thing there. I mean, basically, they all do a pretty good job nowadays. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Although I must say
go back in antiquity a little bit. Maybe you've got some gripes there, but you could even go back and throw a Swan into the mix in those days.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that
Swan, they say. What
for blind operators, the Swans had certain advantages. I believe that the Swan had a tactile dial system that unsighted people could use.
The modern rig, you put 3 modern rigs together nowadays, whatever spins your whizzer.
Yeah.
I must admit, from my point of view, the next step is going to be either Anan or what's the American version? Flex radio, that's right. And I think the first Flex radio I ever saw was in the shack of ZL4 RMH, Ron.
Yeah.
Very impressive. Very, very impressive. Although
it's almost somewhat amusing that they start off having radios, with all the knobs and front end and very few menus in the background. It's all up front. Then they go to the SDR radios where everything's on your computer, and now they build the front panels with a built-in computer, so you can convert your computerized SDR transceiver and make it look like an ordinary desktop unit. And then, of course, when you look at some of the modern ones, that's what they are anyway.
I think it's because of
the very first Flex. The very first Flex I saw was just a box.
Yeah,
and that's the way it was going to be sold until really there's quite an uproar from the ham radio community. Said no, we want things that you can a button and a knob and something you can twiddle with.
Oh, but don't you think that's because we're all old buffers who can't adapt to change? Who
knows?
I think it's the demographic, really.
It's marketing at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, yeah, all of it. I mean, I really have my doubts about the marketing that's behind splitting the available audience between D-Star and P25 and what's the other one? Fusion, Free DV. It has split the
C4
so far.
Well, a few companies have got together and produced these things that are attached to Android phones now, haven't they, where you can have almost any of the encoding systems, although they are proprietary, and presumably they have to pay royalties for the different systems they've encrypted into the unit, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, I'm particularly interested, for example, in modems attached to HF radios, and for digital slow scan, I use EasyPal. We have an EasyPal group that meets every Thursday in Melbourne. They're setting up an EasyPal group on the Ballarat repeater for Monday nights as well. But the interesting thing is that we've now discovered the AVIF picture compression file, which allows digital slow scan systems to produce pictures that are really good. I mean, go back to analog slow scan, it's 240p, it's degraded. It's no better really than a thumbnail, And now these new modems that are becoming progressively more available, particularly software modems that you can download for nothing, I think we're going to see a lot more of OFDM, multiple subcarrier stuff going on with digital file transfer on HF in the near future. I'm interested to pursue that, particularly for text or non-voice.
Something. The Fusion radio. You can get a microphone, I think, for the FT300 or 400, whatever, which plugs into the side of that top panel, and the microphone has a camera built into it, and then you can use that to send the data pictures which appear on the screen of the mobile.
Okay.
I haven't got that far. I don't actually intend to do it, but
updated about once every 10 seconds or something.
Exactly. So they're all straight. That's it. Yeah, obviously, if you want to do video, it's a totally different game.
Well, I'm sure that there will come a time when we can get some sort of basic video through HF. I mean, John Logie Baird was doing it in 1928 with his 30-line pictures and getting recognisable head and shoulder pictures. And if he could do it 95 years ago, surely we can do it today digitally far, far better. Incidentally, 2 minutes to go, fellas. So,
right.
Any further comments before we wrap it up? Rolly, maybe?
No, I'm fine, thanks. I just had. Did you hear me rattling around CW just then? I mean, listening to you guys and having CW contacts.
Oh my goodness, you're not one of those people. You can't carry on two conversations, one on CW. Holy moly!
There's nothing hard about that. That's easy.
You're obviously a commercial operator from way back.
We used to have 3 receivers and 2 transmitters. So you had to monitor 3 receivers. You had 2 transmitters to switch between the 2 transmitters to go to whoever you wanted to.
Not simultaneously. Oh my God.
Yeah. So receiver 1 would take off, receiver 2 would take off. You switch the transmitter to 1. You go, did it? Wait. Go back to 2. Then 3 would burst up, and you go, oh, what's he want? Oh, hold on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then just go back, switch it.
It's becoming a lost art. It really is.
And that was all done. That was all done with these things,
Yeah.
What is it? Oh,
manual key.
What sort of key is that? It looks like a Marconi key from about 1920.
Well, I can't get into. It's one of these ones like that.
Oh, it's a relay. Oh, wait a minute.
The only problem is that on that post there's 750 volts on there.
Oh, okay. So you don't let your fingers creep around. No.
That's why you held it like that and rolled your fingers up like that.
All right.
and that's why you had the they call it a dust cap, but it also kept your fingers away from 700 odd volts, which is plate keying in those days.
Okay, we're going to lose it shortly, fellas. So all the best to you until next week. I hope you can roll up next week.
It's 7-3, Rolly.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice to catch you guys again. It really is.
Very nice to have you there, Rolly. And there it goes, right on cue. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, having just for the last 40 minutes conducted a Zoom meeting. I'm now looking at the text chat. Tom George, nice to see you there. Harry Thau, if I take a drive to the water towards Bass Strait, you can hit Tassie repeater 7RAA. I can occasionally get it from here, but most of northwest Tasmania, unfortunately, on VHF for me. Hang on, I'll change cameras back to the one on me. We go like that, and we go like that, and I switch this light off. And I think we're back where we should be. I have the Police Academy hill, very high hill in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, about 4 kilometres from me, right in line with northwest Tasmania, so it's actually difficult for me to get Tasmania from here. I used to get it much better, when I was living in Surrey Hills, near the radio tower on the corner of Harding Street and Canterbury Road. Now, just reading through the comments here. VK3WL, nice to have you on the text chat. And Pirate, lead-based paints on the tower, probably to keep all the wogs off. I mean, microbe wogs, and rust-causing wogs. And Ardren, Clint Jeffrey, yeah, Clint, we were interviewing Mike Roth, 7MJ, earlier on tonight, talking about his PhD in radio astronomy that was granted by the University of Otago back in the 1970s. He did a lot of work on HF radio astronomy, intercepting whistlers generated by the magnetic field of the planet Jupiter. So he had a radio telescope on 21 megs or thereabouts. Talking about the hardware for Kiwi SDR, the hardware's EOL, says Ardren. The software is still around. But there's another piece of software like Kiwi SDR that supports any SDR. Ardren had one running on VHF for some time testing. OpenWebRX is the name of the software. It's either a fork of Kiwi SDR software or the other way round. And then he talked about CB. It's 80 channels now, yes. We want knobs, says Ardren. I don't know. I have frequently used the Kiwi SDRs on the web, particularly if I want very, very low noise, and using a Kiwi SDR in northern South Australia, I was able to hear voice sideband from the Scandinavian countries on one occasion at 3 o'clock in the morning here on 160 metres. That really floored me. That was the best DX I have ever heard 160 metres provide, but it required a very low noise site, and this here in Melbourne isn't it. I suppose I could stretch it if I had a software-defined receiver with a sense antenna and a loop. I possibly could get the noise down near that, but probably not as low. Cheers QRZ72, says VK Pirate. And I think that's Greg, I'm not sure. Anyway, good night, Rolly. Good night, people. I'll take a final listen on 2 metres before we close. Anybody there for a chat before we go? VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, listening on 147.475.
I'll just say my 7-3 to you, Chris, and thank you again for tonight's broadcast and Zoom meeting. VK3AML, VK3ASE. Cheers, Chris.
Yeah, cheers, Chris.
Yeah, cheers, Dave. Cheers, Peter, and particularly thanks, Rolly, for the effort you put in coming on at the time of the morning that you do. And now we know a little bit about your hidden background. You know a bit about the radar down in Invercargill. You know a little bit about Kiwi SDRs that aren't normally on the net. There's more to this than meets the eye, he said, with a raised eyebrow, or both eyebrows raised. Van Dan Escobar, thanks a lot, Chris. Your work is always appreciated, and without you doing this Saturday nights would be missing something. Well, thank you very much. That's really appreciated too. But in digging up the film material that I do, and in putting together the interviews that I have, and I've been videoing a lot of stuff, as you can see, for 10 or 15 years, feeling inhibited in being able to show some of what I've shot from the point of view of privacy. And now that Dave has moved, I don't feel so inhibited in showing the old stuff I filmed at his place, his old place. So stuff that goes back sometimes 20 years I will be able to use in future. Just depends on sensitivities as regards politics, as regards privacy. Anyway, good night, people. All the best till next week, and I'll now bring the stream to a close and with a little bit more preparation next week, I shouldn't have as many stumbles and fails like the echo that we had early on, which was caused by me not double checking the extra monitor on OBS software. So it was getting 2 inputs for the audio, not 1. Ugh, you can be an idiot, can't you? Well, I can anyway. All the best, people. Take care of yourselves.